Hi everybody, and welcome to this 7-part video series on how to go from sim racing to real racing. A few years ago I became a licensed racing driver and spent 2 years racing at many of the circuits around the UK. In this video series I'll hopefully share my story and try to offer advice for anybody else that would like to do this themselves. So in part 2 we're going to be looking at finding a race series and finding or building a car. So as I touched upon in the intro, I raced for about 2 years. I think it was something like 8 or 10 races in total all around the UK. The series that I competed in, I'll go into more detail later on. It was an endurance series with 2 drivers. We basically shared the car and went through the whole journey together. So if you want to go racing, the first thing you need to do is decide what sort of racing you want to do. Do you want to go rallycross? Do you want to go rallying? Do you want to do circuit racing? Is it saloon cars, open wheelers? So this is obviously something you've got to decide for yourself. And once you start to know that, you've got to look for a car club. So basically a motorsport car club. And there'll be one in each country. So if you just Google motorsport car club in given country, I'm sure you'll get a whole list of them, just like here. And then if you start looking at their websites, you'll find a list of all the series that they race in that car club. And yeah, basically the variation will be massive. It could be single seaters, it could be saloon cars, and each club has its own different series that are running. It's actually surprising when you go through this just how much motorsport is actually happening in the UK. So this is definitely your starting point, and the club I decided to go with was called MSVR. And I knew that I wanted to race in some sort of saloon or hot hatch or something along those lines. And from a sim racer's perspective, isn't it amazing how close this looks to the iRacing series list? So let's theoretically say that I want to race in Formula 3. It's pretty high level, but let's just go with it. This obviously gives me all the information about that series. It tells me what races are happening, where they're happening. And then I can actually look at the regulations for that series and even click onto their website to see how I could take part. So let's go into regulations. You get these documents, sometimes referred to as the Blue Book, and it basically describes absolutely everything to do with this series. It'll say what sort of race license I have to have, what the car needs to be like, what sort of tyres I'd need to use, etc. Okay, let's go for a bit more of a realistic example. So if I was racing today, this Civic Cup series is definitely one that I'd consider. These sort of Civic Type Rs are relatively cheap second hand, and it would be close racing, that's saloon cars, all the same make. It just looks like a quite exciting series. So I clicked into their website. They've got information about how to enter, so entry forms, driver registration. You can even meet the drivers, see the calendar, etc. And then if I look up here somewhere, it's going to have something, probably under competitors, about the regulations. So if I go into here, yet another PDF appears. So I think this is one I want. And yeah, this basically will give me all the details about the series. So it's going to tell me somewhere around here what I need to do to enter. So because this is a car club thing, you have to be a member of the car club, but it's just a formality of just signing up for them. You have to have a valid motorsport license, and it actually says right here what sort of level that license needs to be. So obviously depending on the sport you're doing, you'll have to have a license of different sort. And we'll cover licenses and other bits next video. Tells you how the championship's scored, how rounds are awarded. Trust me, there's a lot of info in these documents. But in here and throughout, it will tell me sort of what engines I'm allowed, what gearboxes I'm allowed, what safety equipment I need to have fitted to the car, what towing hooks are needed, what modifications are permitted, what brands are allowed. So if you're allowed to fit an exhaust, what exhaust is allowed to be fitted, what isn't allowed to be done to the car. And this is particularly interesting. This is all about the classes. So rather than running different classes, in this series, they're going to run it where if you've got more power, you have to carry more weight to make the car more even. So really, really interesting. There's going to be all sorts of stuff about the brakes, the sort of tyres you have to use, the fuel, etc. So this is the next thing you need to do, is basically absolutely read one of these documents from front to back of the series you want to go for. So one thing that I've forgotten to mention is something called scrutineering. So when you turn up at the racetrack on the day after signing on, getting yourself ready to race that day, your car needs to go through scrutineering. And that basically means that people, engineers at the racetrack, will look at your car and make sure that it matches all these regulations. So let's say it says you need a fire extinguisher fitted and you don't have one, or it's out of date, you're not going racing. If it says you need a certain type of FIA approved glove and you don't have it, you're not going racing. You have to be so careful with these details because you will be checked on it on the race day, and you don't want to turn up having spent a whole load of time and money and not be able to race. Okay, so let's say you found a series, you know what car you need, you know you can get the license that's required, etc., etc. What do you do? Do you find a car and buy one, or do you try to build a car for that? So my very strong recommendation is you just buy a car for the series. You know that car is ready to race in that series, and it's race prepped, ready to go. That said, I built a car, and the reason for that is just I couldn't afford to buy one. So let's say that you're going down the route of buying a car. So there are many websites out there where you can go and buy race cars. Basically, if you can see here, there's a whole range of different cars, and we're looking at saloon types, and it's making my eyes water just at the cost of some of these cars. I couldn't imagine paying that sort of money, and then, yeah, ultimately, actually, the risk of smashing that car up is going to be terrible. This website doesn't seem to have a way to sort by price, which is a bit annoying, because basically that's the way I'd normally go, is sort low to high and find the type of car that you need. You've got to be really careful with this, that you're buying a car that is eligible for your series. So don't buy a car because you think that it would be good in a series and then finding out that it just doesn't actually work. So let's take our Civic Type R series, for example. They're going to have a whole load of regulations, and actually the easiest way for us is just to search for a Civic Type R car from that series. So let's just have a look for Civics on here. And if we scroll down quite quickly, you can see there, Civic Cup spec. And if we look at the details of it, so just have a quick look at the pictures. All looks pretty cool. Yeah, so the details will explain everything that's done to it, and it actually says Civic Cup. So you know that it's competed in the Civic Cup in 2019, therefore it should be eligible for the series that we want to do. One thing you have to be careful of is that it ran in 2019, but let's say 2020, or rather 2021 probably now, the regs may have changed. So you need to get the new regulation book and have a look at it and check that that car is still eligible for your current series, because they'll change it per year. For example, they might have changed the type of tyres it has to run on, or how much power it should have, or whatever. And at that point, you either need to modify your car to fit that, or you should actually be considering this when buying the car in the first place. So let's just go back to that Civic advert. This would definitely be perfect for that Civic Type R series. The problem I had when I was this young was I certainly didn't have 14.5 grand to spend on a race car. So you're probably going to always pay a bit of a premium to buy a race car ready to go, because it's going to have had everything done to it. What I'd say is, if you go down the building your own car route, be prepared that it's going to cost a lot more than you think it's going to cost. So going back to my journey, I'd basically found a series that I wanted to race in. I think it was hot hatches, and basically I bought this Clio, as you can see here. So I bought this car really, really cheap. I think it was something like £1,400, something like that. And it had obviously been lowered and stuff like that. One of the reasons why I bought it was the guy claimed a certain amount of power at the wheels which if it had that power and based on the mods he had done was an absolute bargain for £1,400. And he even gave me a dyno print that showed this sort of amount of power at the wheels. And so I went and bought it, and I basically had a vision in my head that this is what I wanted to produce at the end of it. So this car was basically like the car that I had. All I had to do was strip out the car, fit a roll cage, fit a fire extinguisher system, an engine cutoff, electric cutoff, and a couple of other little bits, and a bucket seat. And actually I think the car already had a bucket seat in it, and it would basically be ready to race. I took this car down to a rolling road, got it checked on its power, and it was absolute rubbish. Nowhere near the power that the guy claimed. It was barely even making it at the flywheel, let alone the wheels. It was just an absolute turd of a car. Like, it really handled really weirdly as well. Like, the suspension was all a bit broken. The guy, for some reason, had drilled holes in all the interior metal, I guess to lighten it, but actually it structurally weakened the car. I just really didn't like this car. So I put the car up for sale, spoke to a few friends. One of my friends was really keen to buy it. He just thought it'd be a fun track car. So he came around to test drive it. I went out in my S2000 and chased him around in it. And he really liked it and actually said, well, rather than sell it, why don't we both go racing in it? Ultimately, if we found a series that we could both compete in together, we'd have double the money to spend, and therefore we could actually spend a lot more money on it and make it really, really good. So my original vision was back. I wanted this sort of Clio Cup kind of race car, except the guy that I then was going to go racing with decided actually he'd prefer to race a Honda Integra Type R. And he kind of had a bit of an agreement with an old garage that he had used for his Honda S2000. And basically the guy had always said to him, if you ever want to go racing, I'll help prepare you a car. And for us to save money on the costs of preparing a car would be huge. So the Clio basically got sold. And so in its place, an Integra Type R appeared. So this was actually not as nice as it looks. We travelled somewhere to Wales, I think, and found this car that had been stored in a shed for years. We thought it was good and we'd got a really good bargain, but then we found out that it'd been leaked into for years, sitting in this barn or shed or wherever it was in. And when we actually took all the interior out, we found it was really, really rusty. So one of the first things we had to do was basically grind all the rust off. Not sure if we welded bits together as well, I can't remember. And then basically once all the rust had been grinded away and removed, we then went through a process of undersealing the entire car and trying to make it as rust proof as we could moving forward. But ultimately that was something we didn't expect to do, and we had to waste a load of time doing it straight from the start. While we had the interior out, my second driver partner, he decided it was a really, really good idea to strip as much of the wiring loom out as possible. He thought it was going to save a load of weight. Actually, all he ended up doing was breaking the ABS when he put it back together again, and we never got that ABS working again. When we actually get to the race videos later on, you'll see that we just constantly have problems with locking up wheels and brake bias and all these problems that were caused because he thought he could save a few grams by stripping some wires out. Another one of his bright ideas was fitting this exhaust to it. So it already had a spoon exhaust or something on it, and he insisted we fitted this Buddy Club one because it was going to be so much better. We really struggled with noise limits so many times, especially on track days. We'd always blow past the limit, and even on the race days they were often complaining about how loud the car was. To be fair, it did sound pretty good. Engine wise, I don't think we did too much, to be honest. I think we changed the air filter, obviously fitted the exhaust. I think we might have got the ECU retuned at some point, and got it on a rolling road and remapped, but I think that was about it. And then we looked at upgrading brakes, putting a better brake system on there, better brake pads, discs, fluid. So we bought some fully adjustable coilovers, and basically these were exactly what we needed for the race setup that we were going to go for. And we always were selling the old parts, so all the interior we sold, the old suspension we sold, etc. Anything we could do to make back money, we always did. So we get all this fit to the car. I think around this sort of time, we've obviously got all the rust off, so it's undersealed. We've painted the interior, etc. Just really getting it ready to race. And then we obviously had to buy some race tyres, so this had to be a particular brand, I believe. I can't remember exactly what it was, Dunlop somethings. And I'm surprised how many of these we actually went through because of that ABS issue and the amount of times we flat spotted the tyres. So car is coming together quite nicely now. Bought proper bucket seat and rails. These all had to be FII spec, so you had to look at the blue book and make sure that what you were buying along with the harness, etc., would actually meet the regulations. And then we started putting the interior of the dash back in, because part of the regulation said you had to run a normal dashboard and basically have the loom all wired back in, etc. So we did initially fit 2 seats to it, and this was just so that we could go and drive it on track days and stuff to get used to it. And then we sent the car off to the garage my race partner had done the deal with, to basically go and race prep the car. So this garage had a lot of experience of racing cars, and it basically fitted the fire extinguisher system, the engine cutoff, and the roll cage, and many other bits that were needed just to get it race ready. So we then took it upon ourselves to give it a pretty garish paint job, and fit the relevant stickers for the series that we were going to race in, and also obviously remove the other seat as we wouldn't be needing it for the actual racing. So on the whole, considering this was a car that we basically built on my parents' driveway, I was pretty proud with kind of what we actually accomplished in the end. Obviously had a few favours and did everything on the cheap, but we basically had a ready to race car. So in future videos, obviously we'll actually look at some proper racing, but before we actually went racing, we put the other seat back in and took it to Castle Combe for a bit of a shakedown. So on the whole, the car did really well. Basically, we just had to take the seat back out and put it down to one person again. And we were pretty much ready to race at this point from a car point of view and a series point of view. There's more that I'll cover in the cost section in part 7 that goes into the series and the costs of that and the cost of building the car and stuff like that. In the next video next week, I'm actually going to talk more about how you go racing in terms of everything else you need. So not just the car, but the race license, all the equipment, etc. And then we should, in a couple of weeks, have a few of the races that we did. And I'll narrate those and take you through what that experience was like. So once again, I hope this was useful for anybody that's considering going racing, especially sim racers, which this is targeted at. As always, if you've enjoyed it, please like the video, and if you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I'll see you guys next time.